what they need and is careful. Loves the answer. Hold the question. Can you imagine turning the dreams of a brethren into our Let's open our eyes to a place with no time. Open our minds to love that we'll find. Treated in kind. Where is the regard for the love of humanity? It is hiding in the trenches with all of the progress we've navigated. How have we not seen the most basic truth that we're all connected and no one is free until all of us are free. Where is the love? Open our hearts. Where is the love? Open our hearts. Where is the love?
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. I hope everyone is doing well today and you're having a good week. My name is Danny, and I'm a field organizer with MediaJustice. And thanks for joining us today. One second. There we go. Thanks for joining us today for our Unshackling Freedom Toolkit launch. This Toolkit launch is part of ongoing work to resist and fight to abolish e-carceration and all forms of state and corporate violence. And before we get into it, I'd like to start by introducing our access team. And so for ASL today, it's Crystal Butler and Glashonda Lawyer. And for Spanish English interpretation, we have Ale Esparza and Jose Eduardo Sanchez. So I'll pass it over to y'all for instructions of how to access interpretation.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es José Eduardo y estoy aquí con mi cointérprete Ale. El día de hoy estaremos interpretando entre inglés-español, español-inglés. Las siguientes instrucciones las voy a dar en inglés y español antes de empezar la interpretación. Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Eduardo. I'm here with my co-interpreter, Ale. Today, we'll be interpreting between English and Spanish, Spanish and English, and the following instructions, I'll be giving them in both English and Spanish before starting the interpretation. La función de interpretación de Zoom ya está encendida. Si nos acompañan a través de su computadora o laptop, deberían ver un icono de globo que se encuentra en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Hagan clic en este icono de globo que dice interpretación de idiomas y escojan el idioma en el que les gustaría participar y escuchar el día de hoy. So the Zoom interpreting function is already on. You should, if you're joining us through your computer or laptop, you should see the little globe icon that is on the lower part of your screen. Click on that, select language interpretation, and choose the language that you would like to use to listen and participate during today's session. Para las personas que nos acompañen a través de un tablet o teléfono móvil, pueden hacer clic en los 3 puntitos que se encuentran en la esquina inferior de su pantalla. De nuevo, hagan clic en interpretación de idiomas y seleccionen el idioma en el que gustarían participar. If you're joining us on a tablet or on a smartphone or mobile phone, you can click on the 3 little dots that appear on the bottom corner of your screen. Again, you would select language interpretation and select the language you'll be using to participate in. Por favor, un recordatorio de hablar en el idioma en el que han escogido. Si van a cambiar de idioma, cambien también el canal en el que están hablando. Just a quick reminder, just speak using the language that you've selected. If you're going to switch to another language, just make sure you also switch your selection. Ahora voy a hacer una prueba breve sobre la interpretación y mi co-intérprete va a estar interpretando. So if you are on the Spanish channel, you should be hearing my co-interpreter Ale interpreting what I'm sharing right now. Ahora voy a cambiar el canal probar el canal de inglés. Si están en el canal de inglés, deberían escuchar ahorita a mi co-intérprete Ale interpretando lo que estoy compartiendo. Okay. Right. The rest of the remarks I'll be doing in Spanish. El resto de los comentarios los haré en español. Por último, les queremos recordar que nos pueden ayudar a crear el espacio hablando a velocidad moderada y en voz alta directamente de sus micrófonos. Les pedimos que solamente una persona hable a la vez para no tener que privilegiar una voz sobre la otra. Y por favor no sufran en silencio si su equipo o si su interpretación no funciona. Pueden dejarnos saber a través del chat y con mucho gusto les podemos ayudar. Gracias y gracias a MediaJustice por su compromiso a crear espacios multilingües.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I also want to mention that we have captioning available. And if you need access to that, I believe that information can be shared shortly as well. So yeah, thank you again so much for folks who are helping to interpret and everyone who's helping to make this space a more accessible space. It's really exciting to see so many people here, right? We're just starting, there's already well over 50 people here. And so I know for some folks, right, if we're here on the East Coast, it might be dinner time, it might be time that you're trying to rest, right? But we really appreciate you being here. And also folks on the West Coast, it might even still be, maybe for some folks, right, working hours or you had some other stuff going on, but here you are. And we really appreciate this opportunity to be in community with you. For a few agreements before we get into next steps, I just want to remind folks if you can please keep yourselves on mute unless you're speaking, because if there is some background noise, we will mute you. So just a heads up about that. And then also if you have questions, please drop them in the chat as they come to mind. It'd be great. We may have some time to answer some questions, but of course we want to get a sense of what everybody's thinking and wondering about and try to follow up with that as well as we can. And then also folks have seen, probably saw the notice earlier, right? But this is being recorded. So just a heads up as well for folks. And now, as I mentioned earlier, introducing myself again, I'm Danny. I'm a field organizer with MediaJustice. I use he and él pronouns, and I'm based in Northern Virginia, which is Piscataway land. And we're really excited for today's launch, as folks already started doing in the chat. Please also introduce yourself, sharing your name, pronouns, if you're with an organization, and where you are based. One second. And so most folks here probably already are familiar with MediaJustice, but maybe some folks, this is your first time being here. And so to give you a sense of who we are a national organization fighting for the communication and digital rights for communities of color. We drive a number of campaigns focused on media and tech issues, such as fighting for affordable and open internet, holding tech platforms accountable for hate and disinformation, and disrupting the use of surveillance tools used to criminalize and incarcerate marginalized communities. And for today's toolkit launch, we're really excited. This is part of building and expanding on amazing work that many of you have been doing, that MediaJustice has also been helping out a lot over time, that folks have been studying and building campaigns around. And we hope that this toolkit will be a part of a process to really grow that a lot, right? And so now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our facilitators for the day. And so it'll be Brianna and James. Just to share their bios real quick. Brianna is a policy analyst at the Chicago Community Bond Fund and the Pretrial Fairness Act Policy Coordinator for the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice. In these roles, she collaborates with organizers, impacted people, and policy experts across Illinois to advocate for radical reform of the pretrial legal system. These collective efforts have led to the passage of the Pretrial Fairness Act in January 2021, a law that expanded rights for people on electronic monitoring in 2022 and will end money bond in and reduce pretrial incarceration in Illinois in 2023. Brianna co-leads efforts to educate the public and system stakeholders about the law and coordinates ongoing advocacy to ensure its successful implementation in 2023. And James Kilgore is an activist and researcher based in Urbana, Illinois. He is the director of the Challenging E-carceration project at MediaJustice and has written widely on electronic monitoring and incarceration, including the recently published Understanding E-carceration. So I'll pass it over to y'all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny. I'm really looking forward to this. So I'm going to go through, just give us a little bit about the background of the toolkit and then hand over to Brianna to take us through the program. So thanks so much to everyone for coming out to this event and spending this time with us. We look forward to sharing the toolkit and to taking more steps toward unshackling freedom and challenging e-carceration. The idea for this toolkit grew out of our work in the Challenging E-carceration project. So over the years, Emmett Sanders, the project researcher, and I kept getting calls and emails from individuals and organizations facing the challenges of ankle shackles and other forms of e-carceration, the technologies of punishment and control. So we kept responding to these calls, and we did what we could each time, but we kind of had to do something ad hoc for each particular situation. And then we recognized that if we had a systematic compilation of needed information and support for campaign building in one place, we could direct people to that or work with them to make the best use of the content. We also recognized that we did not have all the resources we might need to support a campaign, so we reached out to other organizations that had a history of working on EM and were sympathetic to our ideas that electronic monitoring is a form of incarceration that we need to abolish. So the toolkit, plus a collection of those organizations working with MediaJustice, are the foundation of our Unshackling Freedom campaign. In the short run, our campaign work enables us to reduce the harms of e-carceration, but in the long run, no one needs a shackle on their ankle or an FBI agent inside their cell phone. We need to build up grassroots power to do this. We hope the toolkit will make a contribution, and we hope today's session will give you a better idea of what that toolkit looks like. And with that, I'll hand over to Brianna to take us through the program.
Thanks so much, James. And thank you so much for having me here tonight. Just a quick overview of what is on the agenda for the evening. Thank you everybody so much for being here. We're doing our overview right now of the evening, and what's going to be what we're going to start off with is political education from people that are doing who are organizing against electronic monitoring in different parts of the country. So we will hear from Ambrose Brooks of Dignity and Power Now and Julie Mao from Just Futures Law. Ambrose has been organizing in LA and can speak to the local and state level of pushing back against EM, and Julie will be able to speak to pushing back on the federal level. And after we have some political education in here, and also we'll hear from Emmett about just the importance of organizing alongside directly impacted people in this work. And so we'll have political education with the whole crew as well as James. And then we will actually go through there will be a walkthrough of the Unshackling Freedom Toolkit. So you can know what's in this resource, what is it offering to local movements that are doing this work so that we can be connected and learn from each other. And after that, we'll have a focus on taking action. And so we're gonna have breakout rooms where we can just dig more in and have a deeper conversation and some question and answer about what it really looks like to do this organizing work on different levels. The main room we'll go into what all the rooms will be, but you'll be able to hear about, if you're just getting started, if you're doing it on the state level, county level, federal, local. And so there will be an opportunity for everybody to learn based on where they're at. And there will also be an opportunity to commit to supporting each other in this work at the end of the breakouts. And from there, we'll have closing remarks and next steps, and we will call it a night. So a lot planned for the evening, and really excited to be sharing space with everybody.
Okay, so one of the things that we've always stressed about electronic monitoring is that the idea of surveillance is not new. It's the technology that's new, but we need to recognize the historical antecedents of electronic monitoring. So one of the things that we always stress is that Black people in particular, Indigenous folks also, immigrants have a long history of being surveilled by the technology of the day. So we wanted to just share with you this short 2-minute video where Simone Brown, the author of Dark Matters, which is an investigation of the history of surveillance of Black people, is in dialogue with intellectual Brenda Sanya. So if we can go ahead and have a look at this video.
So one of the things that I tried not to do in my work, but then it kind of pops up some places, is not to make easy connections with slavery, and then also its afterlife, but our contemporary conditions now. So the work that I was trying to do, at least around surveillance studies, is to say that we can't understand surveillance without understanding how Black people have been surveilled, how they have challenged this, and also resisted state surveillance or from non-state actors within the US. But one thing that was surprising to me, and not surprising, is when I was looking at one of the interviews that you had on the e-carceration website, was around the language that was used. So it was Annette Taylor, and she was discussing the practice of having the ankle shackle, and how it is. So this is I mean, from all the work that you're doing with e-carceration, when we think of like a prison, or that we're living in a carceral system that includes the inside and the outside of the prison, and that these prisons become deterritorialized in a way, or at least the prison now becomes your home. So it's an unfreedom. You're paying your rent or your mortgage or your light bill and everything else to be incarcerated. So you become like the agent of your own incarceration in a way. So the language that she used was that if you, for example, someone, for example, has one of these shackles on, and the cable goes out, and the cable has to do with the phone, and the phone has to do with how the system is being monitored, satellites, whatever it is that then you get marked as a fugitive. And so that language that occurs, like around Black mobilities and the monitoring of Black and people of color's mobilities, is the same language that would be used within slave states. And so there's something about fugivity that allows to challenge the system as well too, that I think that there's an opening there for some type of progressive politics around challenging these ankle shackles and other types of like e-carceral practices, because of the history of people working underground, working in kind of fugitive networks of enslaved people and now incarcerated people to make links and to challenge and at least to overthrow the system.
Yeah, so we know that surveillance is not new. We know that like James said, it's the technology that is changing. And it's so important for us to lift up the experiences of people who are being surveilled under this these mutating forms of mechanisms that are used by the system. And so I'm going to pass it over to Emmett to talk a little bit more about the importance of centering direct experience in this work.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Brianna. So I'm Emmett Sanders. I'm a project researcher for child incarceration. I've been working with James for about 5 years now. When I first met James, I had the shackle on myself. I was experiencing 3 months of electronic monitoring after spending more than 22 years in prison. And while in prison, one of the hardest things is not being able to be there for your family. And so I was very excited to actually come home from prison and be able to reconnect with my family, build a life, and actually be there for them. And I very quickly found out the ways that electronic monitoring prevented that from actually happening. So I couldn't be with my mother when she needed me, or my sister, or my brother, as well as couldn't get, apply for jobs or contribute financially to my household, and a number of other ways that interfere with my life. And I know that in speaking with multiple people over the years who've experienced this, I know that I was lucky in that my nearly as that of others. Electronic monitoring interferes with people's ability to parent their children. It interferes with their ability for healthcare. And it creates mental stress that pushes people to the edge of despair and beyond. And so it is a very, very serious and important issue that we're talking about here. We often say in this work that electronic monitoring is not an alternative to incarceration, but an alternative form of incarceration. And it's very true. It brings the prison home with you, brings what Monica Cosby actually calls a satellite prison into your home. And it incarcerates everyone that's with you. And so it has a devastating impact on the family and the community as a whole. We know that, that in doing this work and organizing and really pushing this message out there, that the people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And so the people who are impacted by this know better than anyone how devastating this can actually be, which is why it's so important to actually center the voice people who are impacted in this work that we do. And I think that it's very important to know too that we often talk about abolition in this work, and a lot of people are making pushes for it, which is amazing. We have to realize that, again, this is an alternative form of incarceration, and it's something we really need to keep in mind here, because any conversation where we're talking about abolition hasn't necessarily include the prison that is electronic monitoring. Work and why it's so important to have people to center the voices of people who are impacted in the work that we do. Thank you.
All right, I think I'm up. Hi, my name is Ambrose Brooks. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I am the campaign's coordinator at Dignity and Power Now, and I coordinate the Justice LA Coalition here in Los Angeles. And just a quick background, Dignity and Power Now is a LA-based grassroots organization founded and led by formerly incarcerated persons and their families, and it's centered on abolition and healing justice. And I coordinate the Justice LA Coalition, a coalition of over 80 organizations and individuals. It's led by directly and indirectly impacted persons. And we all have come together to reduce the footprint of incarceration here in LA by reclaiming the budget and lands and pushing divestment from carceral systems and investment in our communities. Fighting against the expansion of electronic monitoring is one of our 2022 coalition priorities. We're trying to demonstrate why devoting attention and capacity to electronic monitoring is critical for abolitionist movements. EM is not some far off future of incarceration, it is the present. And I'm going to talk about a few trends in terms of what we're seeing in Los Angeles. So In LA in 2015, 24 people were on pretrial electronic monitoring. That's at the pretrial phase of the criminal legal process, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. So that's in 2015, 24 people. In 2021, 1,284 people were on pretrial electronic monitoring. That is an increase of 5,250% in 6 years. The use of EM in Los Angeles County is most significantly impacting Black and Brown communities in LA. And in 2021, 31% of the people placed on pretrial electronic monitoring were Black, and 53% are Latinx. Black women are disproportionately subjected to electronic monitoring in LA. LA has something called a supervised release program that I'll speak to in a second. And within the supervised release program, the electronic monitoring aspect of this, 38% of women who were placed on EM identified as Black, compared to 29% of men. So in LA County, we have a judicial council pilot. So California has a judicial council. They've budgeted for pilot programs throughout the state. This is called the Supervised Release Program. And under this pilot project, a judge has the discretion to release an individual on an surveillance ankle shackle electronic monitor. A lighter version of surveillance where somebody is just checking in frequently with a probation officer, or no pretrial surveillance at all, and they're released on their own recognizance without being subjected to a monitor or checking with a probation officer. And when given these options in LA County, judges 65% of the time chose to release an individual on electronic monitor. What we've heard from the county, and I'm sure we're hearing this all across the country, is we hear judges and we hear municipal governments saying, we're listening to you organizers, we are decarcerating LA County. But what they're doing is they're placing people on electronic monitors. And they pose this dichotomy. Well, isn't it better that somebody be released on an electronic monitor than sitting in jail? We're meeting your demands, organizers. And what we say is that's a false dichotomy that you are creating. In fact, you can release an individual during the pretrial phase of the criminal legal process with no surveillance at all, with no electronic monitor. They can be released to their home. Their family will not be subjected to surveillance. They can be connected with resources and community-based support. We have so many models that can support with that eliminate the use of surveillance. I'm going to speak really quickly about who funds, and also join the breakout room if you want to learn more about what's happening in LA. Here in LA, who's funding the use of electronic monitors is the LA County Board of Supervisors. In October, they approved a $1.4 million increase in the electronic monitoring contracts for the probation department. And it's also the state. The Judicial Council, which is the legislative arm of the California Judiciary, has lobbied to get money for these pilot programs that use electronic monitors. Who profits off electronic monitoring? Well, it's a national thing, honestly. It's a small handful of profit-driven companies that reap millions of dollars through the use of electronic monitoring. Here in LA, the probation department contracts with a company, and I'm not kidding you, it's called the Satellite Tracking of People, LLC, or STOP as their acronym. They use their acronym. The probation department contracts with STOP, which is a subsidiary of a large security conglomerate known as Securus Technology. They make millions of dollars off of electronic monitors, as well as the video and conference call systems that are used in jails and prisons, and profit off of incarcerated persons and their families who just want to communicate. So the people who are funding electronic monitoring are not connected to the communities that are experiencing this surveillance. I'll pass it over to Julie.
Thank you so much, Ambrose. For folks, good evening or good afternoon. My name is Julie Mao. I work at an organization called Just Futures Law. We are a movement lawyering shop and have been working with various movement organizations such as Mi Gente, Community Justice Exchange, I think Ana Maria is on, and various other migrant and criminal justice groups in pushing back on the huge expansion of Immigration and Customs Enforcement's electronic monitoring program, which they term ISAP, or Intensive Supervision Appearance Program. So I'll be going through some trends in the program, kind of giving you guys an analysis of who funds the program, surprise, surprise, we do as taxpayers, and then also who profits, and a little bit about what organizers are doing to really push back and fight and abolish ICE's EM program. So a little bit around the scale of the program. So currently there is about 225,000 individuals in ICE's EM program. So I just want to give us like a moment, a breath, to imagine that scale of individuals. We are talking about, youth. We are talking about women, men, elderly individuals who, in real time, 24/7, are either having to wear ankle shackles, being constantly tracked on a mobile application called SmartLink, which requires them to share their geolocation and intermittently take a photo of themselves. And then also just being constantly harassed by ICE or subcontractors through unannounced house visits, being required to check in at the contractor's office, as well as being required to check in at ICE. So this is sort of the system of oppression that 225,000 individuals, just because they are migrants who are awaiting their court hearing, are going through right now. And the, I think, surprising fact of the matter is that about half of these individuals, actually more than half, about 130,000 of these individuals are new and added participants in the last 2 years under the Biden administration. So this program has just exponentially boomed in the last 2 years because of the Biden administration. And the other trend that we want to make sure folks understand is that there has been a drastic shift from ankle shackles to the mobile surveillance application SmartLink. So this program was enrolling individuals 2 years ago. The SmartLink individuals were fairly low. Now it is about 70% of all individuals who have to have this mobile app saved on their phone and be constantly checking in on it. So quickly, who else funds this program? This is a program of Congress and taxpayers. And so this year, ICE is requesting about $500 million, $527 million of its annual budget just to fund this electronic monitoring program alone. And to date, I think until us groups like CJE, Mi Gente, Just Futures, and some of you all on this call got together to publicly push back this year, nobody really questioned this funding to ICE. Congress basically wrote a blank check. And at the end of the day, who profits? It's the private prison industry. As Ambrose was saying, for us in the immigration realm, the company is BI Incorporated. It has a $2 billion contract with ICE. And similar to Securus, it benefits on both ends. BI is a subsidiary of Geo Group, which also operates the private prisons of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And so our groups are pushing back on this false propaganda of the Biden administration around private prisons and EM being more humane alternative to these jails by really showing the psychological and physical harm. And so the next few months, we'll be looping back around calls to action with Congress, individual case support, and also moving a report with our various groups next month. So we're looking forward to talking about that more in the breakout. And I'll hand it back to, I believe,
Back to
Brianna and
me.
James. Okay.
Yes. Yes, so thank you so much, Julie and Ambrose, for giving us that context of the organizing work that you're doing locally and federally to push back against e-carceration. There will be more opportunities to lean into what they've shared and ask questions in the breakout rooms. But before we get to that portion, we want to just give an introduction and introduce a video about the Unshackling Freedom Toolkit. So what is in the toolkit? It has the basics of what is electronic monitoring and e-carceration. What does it take to build a campaign against electronic monitoring? Case studies in challenging e-carceration in digital prisons, and resources for fighting your campaign. And so I am going to, we're gonna watch a quick video that introduces and promotes this, that we'll also hope that you all will share in the future, and then before James gives us a walkthrough.
Another young black man in my courtroom experiencing the vicious cycle of this racist system. But the cycle can stop with me.
Hi, it's James from MediaJustice, and I'm really excited to announce the launch of our toolkit. Since 2017, our research and campaign experience has taught us that people on the ground need support to challenge the punitive technologies that are engulfing our communities. Our toolkit will provide people in communities with resources and case studies to gather data about electronic monitoring devices, build strategies for engaging local authorities, and learn from other communities that have successfully resisted electronic monitoring and e-carceration.
Hi, I'm Mehmet. After 22 years of incarceration, I came home ready to start my life with my partner and reconnect with my family, but was shackled with an ankle monitor after completing my prison sentence. I quickly discovered the ways in which electronic monitoring brought prison home with me, and that this technology doesn't benefit anyone except the companies that profit from these ankle shackles.
Emmett is not alone. The use of electronic monitors has escalated rapidly in the past 5 years, especially for people on pretrial release.
E-carceration is a part of a long history of surveillance directed at Black people, Indigenous folks, and immigrants. Our toolkit will help you become part of reversing that history.
But we're not fighting to reform electronic monitoring. We're fighting to abolish it and all forms of e-carceration, from license plate readers to weaponized databases and risk assessment tools.
We look forward to connecting with you to challenge e-carceration.
Another young black.
Yes, so I hope you all are feeling the energy from that promotional video, and James now is going to walk us through the Unshackling Freedom Toolkit and what all it entails. I'll pass it over to James.
Thank you, Brianna. So I want to offer you a brief tour through the toolkit. It's taken us about 1.5 years to pull this together, but before we jump in, and I'm not going to take it long, but I really want to thank a few people who have made this possible, particularly the MediaJustice team, Emmett Sanders, the lead researcher on this project, and also the Danny and Rumsha, our organizers, the strategic campaigns director, Myasia Hayes, and of course our overall director, Stephen Renderos, who have always been very supportive of these issues. And we couldn't have produced this without the support of our comms team, Ateng and Ophelia in particular, and also Jack, who's doing the tech for us and always does the tech for us. So we really appreciate their efforts as well. I also want to thank 3 groups of people who did readings of this and proofread drafts and gave us suggestions to make it into a better product. That would be particularly those activists from ACRE, that's the Action Center on Race and Economy Institute, Professor Kate Weisberg from the School of Law at George Washington University, and also Brianna herself from Chicago Community Bond Fund, and Matt McLaughlin from the Illinois Coalition to End Money Bond. So we're very grateful for the support we had from all these people to make this happen. So let's have a look at the toolkit. Jack's going to be our technical guide here. So this is the landing page, and really it's divided up into 3 sections, but essentially this is the landing page. Then there's 2 sections that are where the content is concentrated. The first is the what you should know section. So Jack, if you can move us ahead on that. And so this has an overview of electronic monitoring. And then it, we've tried to insert infographics to make it a little more accessible. And if you can scroll down a little bit, we have stories of people in electronic monitoring. So for example, Levette Mays is probably one of the most famous people who's been on pretrial electronic monitoring, who gave up being on a monitor because she said, and took a guilty plea for a charge that she wasn't guilty of, simply because it made life too hard for her and her children to be under constant house arrest. But we have a number of stories like this. We think stories are a very powerful element in terms of building a campaign. Then we just briefly hit what are the main reasons why electronic monitoring matters, that it perpetuates racism and it widens the net of e-carceration. And of course, we want to look at how we respond. Then we have the first of our kind of sets of information where we can scroll through different topics and uncover information on answering each one of those questions. So we have a series of questions about FAQs for electronic monitoring. So for example, one of them is, how does electronic monitoring harm the individual under EM? And then we take you through the restrictions of movements, physical reactions that people have to the device, the impact on loved ones, and of course, the financial burden of people who may pay up to $25 a day to be on an electronic monitor. We also look a little bit at who makes money off of electronic monitoring, highlighting some of the companies that Ambrose and Julie have spoken about as well: BI, Stop, Sentinel, and the Israeli-based firms Attenti and Supercom. So for people who haven't had that much exposure to electronic monitoring, this section should give you some basic information so you can be better equipped to confront and challenge electronic monitoring in your community or in your state. So now we can go to the other major section, which is what you can do. And so we have a list of things, once again, that will help you how to figure out how to build your campaign. And I think it's important to recognize that we've also had our toolkit translated into Spanish so that it's accessible to people in both languages. So this is Desatando Libertad, about building a campaign for liberation. And then we have sort of a brief roadmap. What are the key steps in building a campaign? And then we go through the strategies and resources that are available here, beginning with understanding the landscape. You need to have a background of what's going on in your community around electronic monitoring, who's making decisions, what kind of devices are involved, what companies are involved. And so to find out some of that, you may need to make a Freedom of Information Act request. So we have here some instructions and some templates on how to file a FOIA or a public information request, a PRA, what are those things? Public request for, never mind, I've forgotten what a PRA is. Public records request. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brendan, for rescuing me as I stumble on that one. Okay, and so, but we have guides and templates for different ways, different bodies you might make a request to in terms of getting the information that you need about what's happening in your local community. All right, and then if we can go down to the bottom, to the last one, we have campaign case studies. In particular, we focus on the Illinois Pretrial Fairness Act and the struggle that's taken place in Illinois around electronic monitoring, which is very closely tied to that. And then we have a case about statewide legislation in New York, and we hope to add cases in your communities, your struggles to these case studies that we have here. And then the last point I want to take us to is the additional resources that we have. So we have a whole list of resources, many of which have been produced by people and organizations on this call, and the organizations that are going to be working with us in terms of building out a team of support. And that's going to include organizations like ACRE, like this Chicago Community Bond Fund, like Just Futures Law, like Professor Kate Weisberg, and so forth. So we have organizations that will be available to provide support, whether it's in research, whether it's in bringing testimony to local government bodies, or simply assisting people in strategizing on how to build a campaign. So, but we want to insist that this is a resource. It's not us coming in to take over your campaign, but rather putting resources at your disposal so you can build a campaign to challenge e-carceration and unshackle freedom. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, James. And so we're really excited for you all to dig into this really awesome resource. And we also want to just continue the conversation about what it's looked like to build campaigns against electronic monitoring in different settings. So I'm going to pass it to Danny and Jack to go over what the breakout rooms are and what it is that we will be discussing.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And as folks have heard, right, there is already a lot of action taking place to challenge e-carceration, to fight for the abolition of this state violence, right, in this form. And so right now we want to keep building on that, right? This toolkit launch isn't just about just looking it over, but how do we start putting it into action starting now, right? And so we're going to do some breakouts. And as folks heard, there's an opportunity for folks to hear. If you are interested or already doing work at the local level, there's a breakout for that. And so that'll be facilitated by Ambrose, and Rumsha will be in that group. Then there's a group for if you're interested in state level work or are already doing that, right? Brianna and Emmett will facilitate there. Federal level, Julie and myself will be there. And then there's also going to be a group for folks who are just starting off, just exploring potential of a campaign that'll be facilitated by James and Posey. So opportunities for everybody to plug in, and I'll pass it over to Jack for just breakout instructions.
Thank you, Danny. So this might be a little different than other breakouts. You get to choose your own adventure, right? You get to choose if you'd like to join the local, the state, or the federal group. So once I open the rooms, you'll have an option. I want to note for anyone who has access needs for captioning, Spanish, and for ASL, that will still be in the main room, which will be our starting off room with the amazing James and Posey. So never fear, you're gonna have a kick-ass group in here. In just a moment, I'll open up those rooms. Hit me up if you have any questions or if you have any trouble getting on the rooms. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Jack. And while you do that, just one important thing. So for time, we will be we'll be coming back at 7:45. So it should be about 20 minutes of discussion, right? If y'all have more questions for presenters of what they shared. So 20 minutes of discussion. And then at 7:40, facilitators, let's also make sure we do this. The last 5 minutes of the breakouts is filling out a commitment and interest form that we'll be sharing out in the chats with folks as well. So let's go into breakouts.
if you are still hanging out in this main room, this is our starting off room. So James, go ahead, and Posey, kick us off.
Hey,
Okay.
everybody.
Go ahead, Posey, go ahead.
Hey, everybody. So thank you all so much for being here. We have a couple of questions for y'all. There seems to be quite a few. Um, we have a couple of questions, and react either by raising like a hand on the screen or using some other reaction, or even just typing in the Zoom chat your response. Um, Are you or have you ever been impacted by electronic monitoring? So we're raising our hands, we're putting it in the chat. We're
I have never been impacted by electronic monitoring.
all right. Other folks in the chat or an emoji, a reaction? Okay, all right. What about had a family member or a close friend impacted? Okay, mother, no,
Yes.
one family member. Okay, yes.
Yes, me too.
Okay.
Yes.
And who's been involved in campaign work? Okay, right on. I see a couple of hands, a couple of thumbs up, thumbs, cool. And our last one here, how many folks are seeking to get involved in a campaign, or are we most of us just wanting more information? Again, we could type it in, quickly unmute if you want to. What are we looking for? To get involved in campaign information.
I'm very interested. No, Mr. Kilmore, you've been with us for so long anyway, and every time he comes, I'm very interested in electronic monitoring, not only for the bracelet that they put, the shackles they put on our hands, not the bracelet, but in our legs, not only for that, but just for the information of electronic monitoring all around us, in our clouds, everywhere we go. I'm just interested in learning all about electronic monitoring, period. And for our campaigns and everything that we're doing.
Thank you, Virginia. Are you from the National Council? Or?
Yes, I am.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. I'm one of their co-founders. I'm sorry I was late. I was trying to get in. I tried to get on your thing, and then they kept asking me for a password, and then the password was half written on the bottom. It was just a mess. So I just wanted to come on and just support you no matter how I get in.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We apologize for the technical difficulties. So I guess, since we have quite a large group here, I think maybe we can start with just a couple, basic questions and hopefully people will be able to answer either unmute yourself or answer in the chat. But what are some of the harms that people are familiar with that come about from electronic monitoring? Sheriffs checking on you. People can't get jobs, provide for their families. Fees. No personal space. Okay, well, thanks very much for those things. So I want to pull out a couple of these things and try to talk a little bit more about them. One of them is the employment piece. So how does how does electronic monitoring impact employment? I mean, so there's a number of ways in which electronic monitoring restricts people's access to employment. One is simply that you can't get access, you can't get movement to leave the house to even go to a job interview. Or if you have a job that has flexible hours, you can't get permission because you have to get advance permission to go during a certain time. And if those hours change, you're kind of, you're not going to be able to operate in that kind of employment context. So the kinds of jobs that people quite often get when they're released from jail, when they're released from prison, tend to be the kinds of jobs that require flexible schedules, driving, fast food, house cleaning, landscaping. All of these kinds of jobs require a lot of movement and flexible schedules that people aren't able to cope with if they're on an electronic monitor. And then, of course, there's the stigma of having an electronic monitor. And if you work in a place where you're in the public eye, then sometimes employers don't want you in there, or maybe a customer will complain that there's some kind of a criminal here with this device. And so that's another way in which it inhibits your ability to work. Posey, I don't know if you want to respond to any of the other suggestions that people have made in terms of the harms that are done.
I'm thinking about the practical and the functionality of electronic monitoring, right? So folks being put into this fugitive state because of what Teresa is saying, malfunctioning equipment, or things on the end of the folks who are supplying the electronic monitoring, right? How pervasive and capitalistic that is, and how it participates in this larger surveillance capitalism that we're forced to navigate. Our communities are forced to navigate because of this.
So I guess, I mean, obviously, so I think we've highlighted quite a few of the harms here. I mean, I guess we want to talk just a little bit about how we campaign against this. What are some of the ways in which we can campaign against this? And I think, so one of the things that people don't always understand about electronic monitoring is that in most cases, it's based at a local level. Every county that has a county jail virtually has an electronic monitoring contract. So the conditions in every county can be different depending on who the company is, depending on who the decision makers are in that area. So in order to build a campaign, you really need to focus at a local level. In some cases, you might be able to focus at a state level if you're talking about people coming out of prison being put on electronic monitor. But for the majority of people, I think, who are on this call, who are dealing with pretrial electronic monitoring, you have to know the particulars of your jurisdiction. That is, first of all, who makes the decision to sign a contract and to implement electronic monitoring? Secondly, how many people are on electronic monitoring in your county? Has anyone gone through any of this in their jurisdiction? Has anyone tried to investigate electronic monitoring in their community to try to find out what the situation is? No takers on that. Okay. Well, I mean,
that's a great point.
Go ahead.
I said that's a great point. To do the research on it first, to find out, so I took good notes on that. Good point.
And also, sorry, and Micah has a hand up.
I can just quickly, so I've done some court watching in Chicago on electronic monitoring, and in Cook County, even within Cook County, there are multiple offices that people in electronic monitoring pretrial can be assigned to. So both like just listening in court, judges don't always say whether there's electronic monitoring or like where the office is, and trying to figure out anything about like whether it's sheriffs or the courts. Like it's very, very, very difficult to figure out which office we're talking about, or like who even to call to get started with like which office is responsible for EM on a given case.
Thank you for that. That's really important. I think you've touched on one of the key things. Let's go to Alita. Is it Alita or Aleta?
Alita.
Alita, yes.
Yeah, we're also trying to use this training that you're going to be given on monitoring to support us in legislation called AB 3121 in California. AB 3121 is our task force for reparations. In my city of Richmond, California, in unincorporated, there's a lot of Black young boys, right, that was targeted for weed, right, back in the day, and now it's legal. And that same trafficking of the pipeline is what they're using in monitoring now. And so we want to put that in the legislation, and hopefully maybe you all can come to our state capitol hearings on Zoom, but it proves that this is another form of this pipeline because of where it's targeted in our city. So almost all the percentage of the boys in one area, because it's unincorporated, which are mostly Black, right, in that neighborhood, are put on this monitoring system. And we're trying to show that reparations is necessary, just like they need reparations for those that were incarcerated for weed and now it's legal, because they still can't vote, they still can't have housing, the same old trap.
Thank you for that. I'm excited about that, the possibility of trying to work on that legislation. I mean, I will say that I have actually interviewed a couple of young men who were on electronic monitoring in Richmond, so I at least have a little bit of a sense of what that might be like. But definitely, let's stay. We'll follow up with you on that after the call, because we have some experience of trying to deal with state legislation, both from the people in Illinois, and I think people in New York have also been dealing with this. And I know other people in California have been on that as well. So thanks so much for that. I think I also want to note that one of the points that Micah touched on is really key to understanding electronic monitoring, that it's opaque. It operates in the darkness. You're kept ignorant. I mean, we've spent years trying to get information from local authorities, from state authorities. These authorities have no responsibility whatsoever to evaluate their work, to write reports on their work, to write assessments of their work. Nothing, nothing, nothing. So there's only a few jurisdictions in the country where you can actually get even some basic information, like how many people are on the monitor, a ratio breakdown of who's on the monitor, how much money people are paying, and why people are being sent back to jail or prison for violating the rules. So this is one of the things, and you're sitting there in a courtroom watching this thing happen, and no one in there knows what's going on, basically. And what we also found is that when we went into the state legislatures and tried to talk about electronic monitoring, that the state legislators knew absolutely nothing about electronic monitoring. So everyone has this idea that an electronic monitor is simply a strap around your leg that you walk around with and you carry on with your life, just as if it wasn't there, and maybe your leg itches a little bit. That's the image that they have. So that's part of our counter narrative to say, no, that's not what it is. It's an intensively coercive and controlling technology that really undermines people's daily life. And I think someone has put in the chat that I saw my man struggle to keep up with the monitor. So here we are. It doesn't just impact the people who are on the monitor. It impacts their family members and their loved ones. So it's much bigger than legislators or judges even think about. And part of our job in building a campaign is educating people about that. And really central to that is getting the stories of people who have been impacted to tell how this affected them and why it's a form of incarceration, not an alternative to incarceration.
I do want to say I want to give folks some time to fill out the interest and commitment form in the midst of doing that, continuing to talk about how we're meeting folks with our desires to eliminate electronic monitoring where we're at, right? So are you all finding access points to connect with other people around this locally?
I mean, we realize that we're really just scratching the surface of
Yeah.
this, and it's much more complicated than that. So it's kind of difficult to really come up with a comprehensive overview of what's happening. Let me just look at some of these messages real quick. I mean, I think someone made a note of how electronic monitoring impacts people's ability to access healthcare. So I don't know if somebody wants to speak to that. I think I'm going to headhunt one of my friends in the audience here, Monica Cosby, to talk a little bit about the impact on healthcare. If you're available, Monica. Okay, sorry, we missed you. So I mean, just in terms of accessing healthcare, I mean, you have to get movement to get permission to go to the doctor or to go to a medical appointment. So if you don't get movement in advance, you end up being in a position where you have to decide whether to go and seek medical attention without permission and run the risk of being sent back to jail or prison, or do you stay at home and worry about the impact of the healthcare issue that you're dealing with? And this is particularly challenging for parents who might have a child who's on a monitor and who want to take the responsibility of making sure that their child gets the medical treatment that they need, but at the same time, they don't want to lose their child back to the system. So it's incredibly stressful. I mean, when I was on the monitor, my mother, who is 95, phoned us at 2 o'clock in the morning saying she had chest pains and she'd already called 911. And my response to that, of course, should have been to go to the hospital and be at her side. But instead, I went to the phone and phoned the 800 number to talk to the operators who have the power to tell you whether you can go out or not. And they told me, well, you can't go out unless you have permission from your parole agent. Well, you know, parole agents aren't really on duty at 2 o'clock in the morning unless there's a boatload of cocaine involved. And so I had to make the choice. Fortunately for me, when my partner was able to go, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, when I had movement, I was able to go. But when I asked my parole agent if this was a possibility in the future, if I could just go to the hospital, they said, it's a gray area. So anybody who's ever been engaged with the system knows that gray areas are not a place where you want to go. So I know we're getting down to the end of our session. I hope we've been able to touch on a few points. I feel like really we should have had about 3 hours here instead of 10 minutes to be able to fully engage. I hope that this won't be the last time that we connect up with you. I hope you'll follow up with us through the information that you leave with us, that we'll be able to we'll be able to reach back out to you and reconnect and work with you on building campaigns at the state and local level, and be able to bring some resources to your campaign, because we know from struggling with this over the years that it's a big challenge. But we also know that not only is the use of electronic monitoring growing, but our ability to resist is growing, because people are seeing how punitive this technology is, that it's not better than jail or prison. It's simply another form of incarceration. And if we're going to get people out of jail and get people out of prison, we need to get them into context, into places where they can improve their life and take things forward, rather than be punished and stuck in their house. Posey, I don't know if you want to add any closing remarks here.
I don't. I'm just looking forward to being able to connect and build these networks through the campaign, through the different campaigns, building networks and community around abolishing all forms of state violence.
Okay, so I think we're gonna probably head back to the rooms. Or well, actually, we are in the room. Sorry, we are the room. We're the center of the universe here. So we'll just wait for the other people to find us. And thank you very much for your participation. And let's hope we can continue this conversation and this building organization in the future.
Thank you so much, James and Posey. If folks have more questions, we will have some more time before we wrap up today. So please keep dropping your questions or any thoughts in the chat. And like Brandon shared in the chat, we have our interest and commitment form. So we really want to make sure we can not only stay connected with y'all about this, but that we can connect each other across our network to make sure that we're all building power and solidarity together to take on this issue.
Better.
Much beyond sharing.
All right, are we back? Whoops. Turned off my video when we came back to the main room. All right, thank you, folks. I hope that was of great help to everyone to really think about how we can start taking action around this. So now if we can do some quick report backs. And so local, we'll start off with local, then state, federal, and then for the group that had the breakout round starting off. And while this is happening, the Google form that folks received, the commitment and interest form, please continue to fill that out. It's also being sent in the chat right now. We want to have as many responses as possible filled out right now, and hopefully we'll be able to highlight that as well. So yeah, I'll pass it over to whoever's doing the report back from the local group.
Sure, thanks, Danny. This is Ambrose from Los Angeles County, and thank you so much to everyone joining the local breakout room. What was made apparent is actually just the different governing structures and the different decision makers throughout the nation in terms of like who can actually help us abolish electronic monitoring in each of our cities. Pre-trial, we talked a lot about pre-trial electronic monitoring, and the way pre-trial services are run in LA County versus Baltimore, for example, is extremely different, but it's important to connect on the things that we actually can do together, which is the political education aspect of fighting against electronic monitoring. And that's intentionally connecting with people to learn about their experiences on electronic monitoring and support the sharing of stories of those who have been subjected to electronic monitoring. That's something that can be done nationwide. And in Los Angeles, we've seen that the public education aspect has really driven people to understand that electronic monitoring and fighting against electronic monitoring is part of the abolitionist movement. It's not an alternative to incarceration, it is incarceration. And so we did talk about storytelling, we talked about political education through media, and then we also shared about how the difference in city and county government structures might make it difficult to have a nationwide approach. And that's why it's important that local organizers from all over talk to each other, learn about what works in your county that might not work somewhere else, but that also may work somewhere else, if that makes sense. And so thank you everyone who joined that breakout room. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Ambrose. Sounds like that was a great conversation. I look forward to learning more of what came out from that. So now whoever's presenting from the state level group.
I think that would be me. Hi, everyone. This is Emmett. And so reporting back from the state level group, Brianna actually walked us through what it was like to build a campaign at the state level, particularly in terms of the Pretrial Fairness Act with Chicago Community Bond Fund. We talked about the importance of really centering the voices of impacted people in the work, and how the focus on EM actually emerged out of the focus of out of pushing back on bail reform. How EM quickly became apparent the EM was actually that alternative form of incarceration we talk about, an extension of the jail itself. And so in order to really push back against bond, you also have to push back against EM. We should also talk about the pushback actually from the state, from the sheriff, and how the system sort of seeks to continue to do what it does, sort of reinvent itself in only in order to continue to do the same thing to the same people, and how the Chicago sheriff has since engaged in sort of a campaign of misinformation, both to legislation and to the media, to sort of create a pushback to the advances that the Pretrial Fairness Act have inspired. And then we talked a little bit about the way that this technology has proven completely unreliable, how thousands of false alarms happen every single month, but also the importance of not positioning better technology as the response to that, right? And that the goal is to do something different, to move away from electronic monitoring and to move away from incarceration. And so that's more or less, I don't know if I was jumping at anything, but that's more or less what we talked about at the state level. And thank you. So we'll turn it over to Danny.
Great, thanks a lot, Emmett. I'll share a little bit about what we discussed in the federal level breakout. So there was a go around of sharing of what folks are seeing in their communities or also in the work that they are doing. We heard, of course, of like the direct impact that folks are feeling from like even the physical aspects, right? But also even like the ways that it affects larger issues of criminalization and what interventions can be created around that. There was also the notice, right, that I think we've heard of the shift from ankle shackles to, programs like SmartLink. And then there were also discussions about potential interventions, right? Some folks have done interventions in the past demanding that that the ankle shackles be removed. That's included tactics like packing the ISAP rooms when people have to go for their check-ins, for example. And so there was discussion about how do we create those threads to make it like a bigger movement, basically, right? And growing from just individual campaigns. Just Futures also shared work that they have been doing and are working on to represent people and also work through those interventions to build up this effort. And I will now pass it over to whoever is reporting for the starting off group.
That'll be me. Hey y'all, I'm Posey. We were in the starting off group. So we talked really about the impacts. I'm looking at my notes here. We talked about the impacts of electronic monitoring, precarious or no access to employment, housing, and healthcare, and also the social implications of electronic monitoring. We heard some stories of our inability to care for loved ones because we have to ask permission for movement. And so we talked a little bit also about how to use this toolkit to start campaigns that really create ruptures in this system of surveillance and policing. So I also want to shout out just James in general for being a really great leader and mentor in this fight against electronic monitoring. So I wanted to say that before I did. I don't know who I'm supposed to turn it back to.
Got you. No, thank you. Thank you. Cool. Really appreciate everyone sharing. I really hope that the breakout spaces felt fruitful to y'all, that you were able to make connections, and that it is part of building the space, right, that we need, that we're developing to continue to build fights to abolish e-carceration and the PIC, of course. And real quick, I just want to see, Jack, can you do a quick screen share? Thank you folks who have already started filling out the Google form. Just want to show you, right, that there are already some folks filling it out. So it's really cool to see that almost everybody's down to help spread the word on social media. There are folks who want to do one-on-ones with organizers. Also, already 6 folks interested in hosting a local teach-in, right? So campaigns team, we have our work cut out for us so we can follow up. And then also the types of support that folks need, right? There's a lot of research that's already been done, so folks still want to do that. And I feel like connected to their communities, right? PopEd, there was a great example of PopEd work that was shared within our federal group, breakout, excuse me. So if somebody can share that link again, that'd be great. And yeah, other ways that we'll be helping out as MJ supporting campaigns that are happening or building up. So yeah, if folks can continue to fill it out, that'd be really great. And I'll ask for reactions for use emojis, either the reactions or in the chat, just to show how you feel about the toolkit launch and building up campaigns. And while you're doing that, I'll pass it back over to James and Brianna for closing.
Okay, thank you, Danny, and thank you to everyone for hanging in there and for this call. I sort of felt like in our group, really we needed another 2 hours to do what we needed to do, but we didn't really want to ask people to stay for another 2 hours, and we didn't provide dinner, so maybe next time. But seriously, we just scratched the surface, but I think we made some really exciting connections with people, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to follow through, and that what we've created here with the toolkit is going to be just one tool in a much bigger toolkit that will give us a comprehensive strategy to take this forward. And I'll now hand it over to Brianna, who I think speaks to us from kind of a bit of a cutting edge place in this struggle against electronic monitoring. Cook County, Illinois, where facing both the wrath of the mayor, the sheriff, and lots of other people trying to stop the work that the Chicago Community Bond Fund has done over the years, but we know that they won't be deterred.
Thanks, James. Wow. I appreciate that. I just want to say thank you all so much for coming out tonight when, we were talking about the connections between just the expanding of technology in our society and how it almost feels like we are desensitized to the way that our data is collected, the ways that we're surveilled. And so it can feel like you're up against something that's almost bigger than you when it comes to the movement for this level of surveillance in our daily lives. But I truly believe that people on this call, the people in this movement against e-carceration, that we are powerful and that we can turn the tide, we can push back, we can challenge e-carceration, and we can help people understand that our freedom is more valuable than a false sense of safety that comes from surveillance and punishment. And so I just want to thank everybody for all that you shared tonight. Emmett, James, and I just feel like, James, you often, center and hype up other people, but just want to really shout out James for the amazing leader that you have been in this movement of schooling all of us about e-carceration and electronic monitoring and providing resources and leadership. And shout out everybody, if you don't have James's book, please get it, Understanding E-Carceration. You will not be sorry. So we're just so excited to be in this movement with you. I'm excited to be able to continue to share space. Everybody, please fill out the form so that we can continue to connect and follow up after this, because this is not the end. This is the continuation of the collective fight to get us all free. So thank you all so much for being here, and I hope that you have a great evening.
Thank you all. We'll follow up with materials and next steps by email very soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.